You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to the Season 2 finale of Tales from the Drive-Thru. Season 2 is nearly 6 years in the making, because there was a lot more time between episodes, and it was a lot less consistent as an actual season than Season 1 was. But today is a very special episode in that we won't be telling a new tale, but we'll be taking a look back at the series and talking about its production, and kind of looking at it back as a retrospective and my memories of it. So, the whole genesis of Tales from the Drive-Thru, as you would imagine from the name, is that I worked at McDonald's for 3 years, from 2012 to 2015. The series has evolved to be much more than that, especially in Season 2, but with Season 1, the main goal was to tell interesting stories of my time working at McDonald's. Obviously at McDonald's I had a very different work ethic than I do now. I half-assed everything, I fucked around a lot. I got away with fucking murder when I worked there. Management wouldn't really say anything to me because they had a really high turnover rate where people would just quit left and right. So because I never fucking quit and I was basically always there on time, whenever I did step out of line, they didn't say shit about it. I started to use that to my advantage more and more as the time I worked there. It started out with me testing the waters. For the first few months I worked there, I was a model employee, and then as it went on, I would be more and more pushing my luck. Until eventually I found out I could get away with basically anything I wanted. I told customers to fuck off, I came in late. Like, granted, I was always there, and when I came in late it was rare, but when I did it with complete blatant disregard. I'd come in 10 minutes late pretty frequently for a while there, and they didn't say anything to me about it. But there were several times where I would come in like 2 hours late, and they either wouldn't say anything, or they'd ask me, and I'd give some stupid answer. For instance, one answer, I literally told them I wasn't properly motivated to be there on time. Other times I would blow off days of work and be like, oh shit, was I supposed to be here? Which again, they let slide because I was there most of the time. I almost never missed a day except for when I did, right? I know that sounds like a contradictory statement, but I was there basically every day, and I had what they called open availability, meaning they could schedule me for any shift. Now that said, if they scheduled me a dual shift where I had to work graveyard and then morning, I either wouldn't show up for the morning shift or would come in several hours late. They stopped scheduling me dual shifts after a while. The pay there was fucking awful. I got paid like, I think $7.75 an hour when I started, and I was making like $9 an hour when I left. That is fucking awful compared to what I make now, or even compared to what I made as a temp at the warehouse I work at now. In fact, the reason I ended up quitting there is because there was a new hire that was making 25 cents an hour more than me on her first day, and I'm like, fuck that. I remember I found that out a few weeks later, but she had been making that much when she started, and I remember I treated her kind of like shit that whole day when I quit, because I'm like, fuck you. Which in retrospect was me being an asshole. There was no reason for me to be a dick to her. That's what I ended Season 1 on, right? Was talking about why I quit, but then throughout Season 1 I obviously talked about all the crazy shit I did, putting ketchup in the coffee machine, deep frying Happy Meal toys before they cleaned the fryer, messing with customers, which was a pretty regular occurrence, and for a while I double-teamed them with this one guy who would later turn into a fucking snitch and tattletale to me when we both vandalized a freezer in the back, and he got caught, threw me under the bus, and then I said, yeah, it was me, because I take responsibility for the things I do, right? They questioned me about it, and I'm like, yeah, of course. But I didn't throw him under the bus because I didn't know he did that to me, because that's how I am, I'm loyal. And I found out he was a piece of shit, but what happened was he got fired. I got told don't do it again or there'll be consequences. Which literally nothing happened to me. After that, they still wanted to make me a new manager, which I eventually turned down. Looking back, the job, honestly, I have some nostalgia for. It was a simpler time in my life. I worked a lot longer shifts, I made a hell of a lot less. My schedule was sporadic, and I never knew when I was gonna go into work until that week I would get the schedule. I had to deal with customers, but overall, I liked the job. Like, there are problems with it, obviously. It's not something I would want to do again, but as I've said before, I would go back to fast food if I was absolutely desperate. I would not go back to a call center, which is precisely where I went after McDonald's. Basically, once I found out that chick was making more than me, I couldn't stand to be there anymore. And it just so happened that as I was getting ready to quit, because the job was tedious and monotonous and I was getting tired of it anyway, that chick making more than me was just the straw that broke the camel's back. An old neighbor of mine actually referred me to the call center she worked at, so that she could get a referral bonus, which I, of course, jumped at the fucking opportunity because I wanted to get out of there. Turns out the call center was much worse, but we'll get there in a minute. I started the training at the call center, and I worked there for 2 more years. So, McDonald's 3 years, call center 2 years. Neither of these were actually my first job. I did a job as a newspaper deliverer for 3 months, which I covered in the Season 2 episode, Tales from the Paper Route. But I started at the call center, worked there 2 years, absolutely hated it. I was working at a call center taking tech support calls for Geek Squad over the phone. I didn't work directly for Geek Squad, but I worked for a company that actually went out of business, the call center. So the call center I was working at shut down. It doesn't exist anymore. But at the time, they were taking calls for Geek Squad. They've been around for a long time, actually. They used to take calls for all sorts of computer companies and shit. They've been around since, like, the 90s. But that call center did shut down, and I could see it as a sinking ship, so I jumped the fuck off there, because things were getting worse and worse. But basically, my job was to do computer tech support over the phone. And you know something? I knew fuck all about computers, but guess what? That doesn't matter, because what my job largely consisted of was telling people to restart their computer, restart their router, helping them install an antivirus, or transferring them to an online remote agent who connects to their computer. So what they would do is, we have these things that would let you connect to someone's computer remotely. Scammers use the same exact technology to connect to computers. There's a bunch of different ones out there. There's LogMeIn Rescue, there's AnyDesk, there's TeamViewer, there's a bunch of them. We used LogMeIn Rescue, or a variant of it that was made for Geek Squad and was branded. I would connect to people's computers and I would do quick fixes and then transfer them to an online agent if they had tech support. If they had the tech support plan, then sending it to an online agent to fix it was free. It was included with their costs. So not free, but included, right? If they didn't, it's a fucking ripoff. It's like $145 to remove a virus. So fuck that. I would always tell people if they had a Windows 7 or higher computer, which at the time was what Microsoft would still support. In fact, they had just barely begun to phase out the support for XP and Vista when I started there. And for a brief time, I could actually still service computers with those, but they phased that out pretty quick after I started there. But if people had a computer with Windows 7 or newer, I would just tell them, take it into Microsoft. They'll remove the viruses for free, which they would. Now they only do it with Windows 10 or newer, and I don't even know if they do that anymore, because I haven't had to do that in years. I actually took my laptop into Microsoft once and had them fix a virus for free, so that's how I knew that they would service it. But I would constantly tell people on the phone just how awful our company was, and you may be thinking, how'd you get away with that with QA? Well, luck of the draw. QA would only listen to calls that were between 3 and 45 minutes. Anything shorter than 3 minutes, they didn't check. Anything longer than 45 minutes, they didn't check. So if there was a call I wanted to not go and have them look at, I would just either get them off as quick as possible, or extend it for like an hour. I'm not gonna lie, I hung up on a few people while I worked there. I told customers to fuck off a couple of times. It wasn't anywhere near as common as it was at McDonald's, but it did happen. I shit-talked the company like a lot. And while I was there, I had a bad habit of coming in like 5, maybe 10 minutes late, but I literally never missed a day. I requested off like maybe 3 days in my entirety working there, but I never missed a day other than the ones I specifically requested off. But I didn't get weekends off. What they had me do was I had Monday and Tuesday off, and then I worked Wednesday through Sunday, which is a double-edged sword because, you know, I wasn't off on the weekends, but on the plus side, whenever I went somewhere on my days off, there was a lot less people there because it was during the work week. Anyway, eventually I could see a sinking ship coming. They wouldn't even let me request weekends off, period, like when I needed days off. And that was kind of a deal breaker. They gave us this fucking class on things we're not supposed to say, which, you know, there was the common stuff like don't swear at customers, don't badmouth the company, that kind of thing. That was fine, I understood that, even though I did both those things from time to time. But one of the things they were saying not to do was to use phrases like, I think, or let me check, or phrases like, oh, my system is updating, or let me pull you up in my system, because we had to get people's information. They didn't want us to acknowledge that we were getting people's information to pull them up in our account. But, at the same time, if QA picked up a call and you don't verify them within the first 2 minutes, they would dock you for that and it's an automatic fail. So I brought up in the class, what exactly do you expect me to do if I can't say, hey, I'm trying to pull up your information, and I wasn't able to pull it up, and QA doesn't see that I pulled up their info in the first 2 or 3 minutes? How the fuck are they supposed to know if I couldn't do it? They're like, oh, well, just put it in your notes. QA will still autofill you for shit like that half the time, because the company is disorganized. They literally got rid of departments that helped people. For instance, there was a store escalation department, because let's say you go to a store at a Best Buy, because Best Buy and Geek Squad are the same thing. You go to a Best Buy, and the manager says, fuck you, get out of here, you're ugly, I hate you. And you want to report it to the company. Guess what? They got rid of the department to resolve issues like that. There was a department called Store Issues Escalation. They got rid of that department So I had nowhere to fucking transfer people to when they had that problem. So when I had people call up and be like, yeah, these people in the store, they were super disrespectful, I'm like, well, I guess you're kind of fucked. The company doesn't have a department for that. Bye, and then hang up. Because I had no choice. There was no department. So I could see all of these problems racking up, and I'm like, fuck this. And so then I got a job going door to door for a solar panel company. That lasted all of a week. I realized how awful that was after a week. From there, I would later get a job at the current job I have, but through a temp agency. That's thanks to Danny, because Danny also did the door-to-door stuff. And then we went through the temp agency, and then I got the job where I am now, where I eventually got hired on, and then got promoted. And have been there for around 6 years. There was a couple other temp jobs I did while my current job didn't have hours for temps at the time. I worked in a fan warehouse for 2 days. I worked in another warehouse for 2 months, but then the manager was a fucking two-faced asshole who told me, hey, yeah, come back tomorrow at 7. Then called the agency, and the agency called me and said, yeah, they said they don't need you anymore. Which I didn't even know we had a fucking problem, but that again was already an episode in Season 2. So, that's all my work history, right? Tales from the Drive-Thru started while I was working at the call center, and it was meant to tell the stories of me working at McDonald's. It evolved to have me telling stories of me as a customer at places, doing volunteer work, and eventually to talking about my other jobs, as I have in Season 2. Season 1 was made using something called Upload Studio, which you can't actually get Upload Studio itself anymore, but you can still use the game DVR that was tied to it. So it's on your Xbox One. There's this thing called Game DVR where you can capture gameplay footage. Now, back in the day, they used to only let you get 5 minutes. Now I think they let you get like 15. But you used to be able to get 10 through a glitch, so sometimes I would do that glitch to get 10 minutes of footage. And you can add voiceover to that footage in Upload Studio, which again, Upload Studio, as far as I know, no longer exists, so you can't add voiceover there. You'd have to actually have editing software now. But at the time, I didn't really have editing software. This was during Gen 2 of the channel, so obviously that was kind of the Upload Studio era where most of my videos were made either using Upload Studio or just raw videos recorded on my phone. Since I was using Upload Studio, I couldn't really put up relevant images, so instead I decided to start a tradition with it, which I have kept going to this very day. And that tradition is, I never use the same exact game twice for Tales from the Drive-Thru. I actually have a document with a list of every game I have played in a Tales from the Drive-Thru episode, or used footage of. So that way, I don't reuse my footage, and I don't reuse the same game. So there's a different gameplay footage in every episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. That's just a little touch I've kept since the beginning, and I intend to keep doing so. Obviously, my games at the time were limited to Xbox One games because I didn't have a capture card. The only computer I had was a laptop, which was given to me by my college, and that's where I edited my videos on. And I didn't even really use that laptop until later on to edit. Like, I did occasionally splice the Upload Studio clips together in YouTube Video Editor before they got rid of that version of YouTube Video Editor. And the reason I did that is because you could splice clips together in Upload Studio, but it often crashed when you tried to do that. So I would make each individual clip 10 minutes at max in Upload Studio, and then splice them together in YouTube Video Editor if I had to. They were often like 5-minute clips or even less, but that's what I got in the habit of doing. And also, Upload Studio, I had no control of the volume of the games versus my voice, which is why there's always game audio in those early episodes from Season 1. Season 2 entered Gen 3 through 5 of the channel. Gen 5 is what we're on now. Gen 3 was when I started editing using Movie Maker, which is still what I use, because that's just the kind of guy I am. I use Audacity to record my audio and Movie Maker to edit the videos. But Upload Studio had little intros you could put at the start of videos, which I did early on, but kind of stopped as it went on. The mic I used for Season 1 was a headset mic. I think it was a Skull Candy headset, and the mic sounded like shit, and I'd put it really up close to my mic. I'd take off the headset and hold it up to my mouth and talk into it directly. So, in a lot of my videos from Gen 2, while I was doing that, you can hear me taking obnoxious breaths and stuff, because I didn't have a way to edit them out. But I always enjoy telling the fun stories of when I worked at McDonald's, and from other workplace stories, and other things that are similar enough to be considered part of the series. I never changed the title, because I think the title Tales from the Drive-Thru fits the series so well, and I've kept it. Every episode, I've also done a thumbnail where I would edit the Crypt Keeper into it in some way. There's other edits I do, some are more high effort than others. But one constant I've always had is to make sure that the Crypt Keeper is featured in the thumbnail. Because absolutely, it's Tales from the Drive-Thru, so you gotta have the Crypt Keeper. As Season 2 started, I eventually got the ability to record audio and video separately because, again, I use my computer to record stuff now. For a brief time in the early parts of Season 2, I actually recorded audio on my phone and then would email it to myself and then download it onto my laptop and then put it together with Movie Maker. But then later on, I would get my current microphone I use, which is a Blue Snowball mic, which, you know, is not the fanciest mic, but it's a $50 mic that gets the job done, and I quite like it. It does the job fine for me. For my purposes, it's perfect. 2016 had the highest amount of Tales from the Drive-Thru content, and then after that, it became more sporadic. 2017 was still fairly consistent with it until I finished Season 1, but there were literally 2 episodes in 2018, 3 episodes in 2019. 2020 saw a brief resurgence with a whopping 9 episodes. 2021 only had 1 single episode, and then this is the 3rd episode of 2023, with no episodes in 2022. So that's sort of the production of it. Tales from the Drive-Thru is a staple of the channel. Doing these episodes takes me back to the early days of my channel, and it's super nostalgic for me. I love doing it. I love sharing the stories of my different workplace exploits, and I plan on doing more with Corbin. Corbin did do 1 episode talking about some of his workplace adventures. And I thought of doing a viewer episode at one point too, but I never got around to it. But, you know, could still happen. I plan to keep doing Tales from the Drive-Thru as long as I can find interesting things to talk about. But at the end of the day, when I've told so many, it starts to run thin where I start either repeating similar experiences or I just run out of ideas. Not to mention, you know, McDonald's was 8 years ago at this point when I left, so a lot of that is not as fresh in my memory as it was when I started the series initially. Like, I remember very few of my coworkers from the time. Like, I remember some guys from the night shift who I considered friends at the time, and I hung out outside of work a couple of times. I remember this one guy on the night shift who was kind of a weirdo and kind of a two-faced asshole. I remember a few people on the morning shift, but for the most part, I forget a lot of them, to be perfectly honest. I remember all the managers, and I remember the ones that I worked directly with. And I remember what it was like working the cash register in the back of the drive-thru. And that takes me back. I do kind of miss that period of my life because things were a lot simpler. I didn't have as many bills to pay. I wasn't as informed in how fucked up the world is yet, so, you know, I was blissfully ignorant. And at the end of the day, I had fun at work, which I still do sometimes now, right? Like, don't get me wrong. My current job I do like, and my current job is my most bearable job. There's still some fun stuff that happens there, and there's still going to be some tales from that. There's already a couple episodes where I've talked about stuff from my current job. Obviously, I'm not going to mention the company name, and it's funny because in Season 1 of Tales from the Drive-Thru, some episodes I mention McDonald's outright, other ones I don't, so it's kind of inconsistent on that. It's kind of funny when you think about it. But I would say out of all my jobs I've worked, my favorite is the current one I have had. It's certainly not my dream job. It drives me nuts sometimes, and there's a lot of things I don't like about it, particularly with management. I would say my most nostalgic jobs are McDonald's and the newspaper route. I also worked in a greenhouse. I forgot to mention that one. Back when I was in middle school, I had a school-related job where I worked in a greenhouse, and the most I got paid was like $45 for a month. Which at the time, I was happy about, but it's fucking literally nothing. Like, that's crazy to me, thinking about now. Because that's like $10 a week. But they paid you for what amount of work you did. And it was 2 class periods a day that I worked in a greenhouse, got paid for, and got science credit. That was my first ever job at age 14. Which in this state, you typically can't work until age 16, but I guess because it's a school job, there was different rules with that, and it counted as a class as well as a job. Another interesting thing about that job is they gave you $1 every Friday to use on the vending machine. But yeah, that was my first job, then the paper route, then McDonald's, then the door-to-door solar panel salesman, basically. Then temp work, which led into the current job I have now. But I would say my least favorite job was probably the solar panel thing. That one was pretty bad, because they straight up lied to me about how much I'd be making, lied to me about the quotas not mattering at the beginning, and wouldn't record shit that I did properly so that I didn't get enough credit. So that was pretty bad. I would say my second least favorite job was the call center. I would never return to the call center because call centers are fucking awful. I will never do that again. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this retrospective on the Tales from the Drive-Thru series, one of the classics of my channel that's, maintained its place, although, sporadically in the later years. But it is a remnant of Gen 2 that has made it this far, and we'll keep it going. I want to try and get some of my older series going again, like movies you probably never fucking heard of and a couple others. But obviously, I don't upload a lot of those series very often anymore, so we will try. But I hope you've enjoyed. I've rambled on enough. This has been Fugitive Red-Eye. Have a good one. See you in Season 3, and toodles!
Subscribe to Fugitive Red-Eye.